Welcome to this short Purple Mash Bite webinar. In this webinar, we will be exploring how to use the PRIMM principles to inspire your children's coding. So what are the PRIMM principles? PRIMM stands for Predict, Run, Investigate, Modify and Make. These principles underpin the teaching of programming in computer science, and children should be given the opportunity to explore these principles in their learning. Children should be given the opportunity to predict what code will do, summarizing the task, and then running through the code to check if their predictions are correct. They can investigate by tracing through the code one line at a time, and then modify the code by adding their own details to change the actions and the outcome of the code, and then perhaps using the original code to make a brand new program that uses the same ideas in a creative way. The coding units in the Purple Mash computing scheme of work are built on the PRIMM principles. If I go into any of the coding lesson plans in any of the year levels in the Purple Mash scheme of work and scroll down to page 4 past the table of contents, you will see the PRIMM principles outlined here. The PRIMM principles can be used with whichever coding tool you are using with your children. So whether you're using 2Go to teach simple instructions and algorithms using the little turtle, or whether you're using Logo with your year 4 pupils, or whether you're using our block coding tool 2Code. Let's look at some practical ways that you can use the PRIMM principles when using the guided activities here in 2Code. I'm going to open up Princess and the Frog. Now, each of the guided activities give children an opportunity to work through these different challenges, including a debugging challenge. Eventually, children will get through to the last stage in the challenge, which will give them the opportunity to explore and create their own design using the commands that they've been learning in this guided activity. This is an example of what the code might look like in this last creative step of Princess and the Frog. Let's apply the PRIMM principles to this code. So the first thing I would ask my class to do is, before I run this code, can somebody tell me exactly what's going to happen when I press the run button? Let's trace it through one line at a time and see if they can tell me exactly what's going to happen and in what sequence the events will happen. So when I press run, the princess is going to move right. Is she going to move right? When is she going to move right? She will only move right when I click on her. Well, let's run that to see what happens. Let's run it to test our prediction. There you go. The princess is not moving. Well, it's because we have to click on her. Now, for older children, Key Stage 2 children, they're expected to be able to explain the behavior of simple programs, whereas for Key Stage 1, they are only expected to be able to predict the behavior of simple programs. So for a Key Stage 2 class, I would ask them to tell me why the princess is not moving, even though the code is running. And it's because I've used a click event, which requires some user input here. So the user has to click on the princess, and now she's moving right, and you'll see the code flashing there. Let's stop that and let's see what happens next. I would get the children to write on a little whiteboard exactly the sequence of events that they think is going to happen when I press run. So we've predicted what the code will do. We'll run it through. We'll test if our predictions are correct. And the princess is going to collide with the frog. There we go. That's exactly what I predicted it would do. Now we would modify this code to have a different outcome. In order for my children to be able to modify this code, I would need to set this code as a to-do for them to modify. So I would do that by using the drop-down menu and clicking the share button and setting it as a to-do using this teacher feature here. So this is what it would look like from a child's point of view. I'm logged in as Maddie O'Neill in class 2, and I've set this to do for the whole of class 2. Their task is to modify the code, seeing if they can use some nested timers to make things happen. Let's click the start button and click OK. And there is the code exactly as I saved it and then set it as a to-do. With that code already in there, the children's job would then be perhaps to remove some of the code that's there, modify the code so that when they run their code, there is a different outcome. Here's another example of using the PRIMM principles with the 2Go tool for Key Stage 1. In this example, I have used the Settings and the General tab to switch the programming on, which enables me to program a 5-step algorithm, a 10-step algorithm, or a loop. So I've set up this loop here so that it loops 4 times. I can click through there to make sure it's a loop repeating this set of 5 steps in my algorithm 4 times. And I've programmed the first step and the second step in my algorithm. I'm going to ask the children, what do you think is going to happen when I press play and run this? What do you think my bumblebee is going to do? The first thing he's going to do is go forward 3 steps, and then he's going to turn 1 clockwise turn to the right. And he's going to repeat that set of instructions 4 times. What shape do you think he's going to create? Well, let's run that and see if we were correct. Right, so he's made a square. Fantastic. Let's rewind it back to the beginning. Let's run it through a little bit slower this time, and we'll play 1 step at a time and see what happens. So the bumblebee is moving forward 3 steps, now doing 1 turn, and he's going to repeat that set of instructions 4 times. Now, the next thing I might ask children to do, I might set this task as to do for my class and see if they could modify this to make perhaps a rectangle shape. You could increase the complexity of the modification by clicking on the settings cog and changing the angle that the bumblebee is going to turn. Again, I still have the loop, but this time I'm going to see if the children can create an octagon using this 5-step algorithm, but this time I'm going to loop it 8 times. I might reduce the number on there and let's see what happens. Let's speed it up and see if I can create an octagon. There we go. Now, if I'm very, very clever, I might get the children to see if they can create an 8-pointed star, or perhaps manipulate some of the instructions here. Let's have a go at something else. Let's try this. I'm going to change the color that I'm drawing and press play, and now see what happens. Completely different shape with a square inside a square. This is an example of an offline activity that I've created with the same principles that I've just showed you with 2Code and with 2Go. If I zoom in here, I'm asking children to predict, explain, and understand what code will do. Here I have that square code using 2Go. I'm going to ask the children to read through this code, predict what it will do, and summarize the task. Underneath, I have the Princess and the Frog activity where I've got the scene on the left-hand side, the code on the right-hand side, and I'm going to ask the children to predict what's happening by tracing through the code line by line. I will have then set it as a to-do for my children to complete, and they would go on and complete that as a to-do and then modify the code. I've also included this idea of a supercoder. If we were supercoders and there was no limit to our coding ability, what would we do to make our code more fun, more exciting, more complicated to play? And I would get the children to write down their modification plan here. I would then see if the children can actually code their modification plan here in Princess and the Frog. They've only been given a certain number of commands in this particular guided lesson. So if we wanted to use our supercoder ideas, we might have to come out of here and go and program our ideas in either FreeCode, Chimp, Gibbon, or Gorilla. If I use FreeCode, Gibbon, and Gorilla, I then have a lot more commands available to use to see if I can program my great ideas. Let's look at how we can use the PRIMM principles when we're teaching text-based programming using Logo. Here is an example that I've used with the Year 5 class. First of all, I have created a triangle procedure. If I click on that edit pencil there, I can see this triangle code here using a repeat functionality and the brackets, the square brackets here, forward 14, right turn 120. I'm going to ask the children to predict what will happen when I run this procedure. What kind of triangle do you think it's going to create? Let's have a look now at the circle procedure. I wonder what size circle this is going to create. Let's click OK and let's call each of these procedures down here in the command line. Let's click triangle. And I'm going to run that and see what happens. Let's call the circle procedure now. I would go back into the triangle procedure here and ask the children to modify the code to see if they can make a smaller triangle that doesn't go off the screen like the one that I've created. Perhaps they could also modify the parameters here of the circle procedure to see if they could make a circle that's half the size or double the size. There I have modified my procedure to make a smaller circle. Here is an offline activity I've created to get the children thinking through the PRIMM principles using Logo. They are matching the two-dimensional shapes with the procedures written underneath. Their task is then to see if they can make the procedural code for these two-dimensional shapes. Here is a slightly higher level example of using the PRIMM procedures. Children could use these pre-made procedures to create the stars, run it in Logo, and then see if they can modify the parameters such as how many times it repeats, how many steps forward the turtle takes, and what turn the turtle makes. So whether you're teaching programming using the simple instructions in 2Go or Logo with your older Key Stage 2 children, or block coding using 2Code, using the PRIMM principles when teaching coding will inspire the programmers in your class.